The 80s was a decade known for its immensely popular and very commercial action cartoons that dominated children's entertainment. Thundercats, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Transformers, Voltron, and He-Man are just a few examples that have stayed present in our minds even 30 years later, and are still instantly recognizable to children and adults alike. All these shows were created with the intent of marketing toys to young boys, and all these shows have had at least one reboot since the 80s. Everyone knows these names, but another name you might only barely recognize, if you remember at all, is She-Ra. She-Ra was an action cartoon made for girls to build off the success of the very male-dominated show He-Man. Whereas there are a long list of boy-oriented cartoons, and many of them have been remade or rebooted in the last few decades, there are very few action cartoons for girls from this period, and very few cartoons for girls at all that have been rebooted. There's My Little Pony, and Powerpuff Girls, and My Little Pony, and My Little Pony. Yeah. But now it is time for She-Ra to join the mighty ranks of 80s action cartoons getting a reboot, and I just so happen to have given full access to the first season of the show, so I can provide you all a review for you lovely people. I'm Hailey, and this is my spoiler-free review of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. I will admit, I don't have too much experience with the original She-Ra cartoon, but from a few episodes I watched for research on this video, it seemed pretty standard for its time. Like He-Man, Transformers, and Voltron, it was a long series of episodes with very limited motion, very little plot progression, and a formulaic approach to its storytelling. Aside from the first few episodes, the final few episodes, and perhaps one or two in the middle, nothing serious ever really happened on these shows. If I got anything wrong with that summary, please forgive me, as I didn't really have the time to watch all 95 episodes of the original series. Like many of the reboots of these 80s cartoons, the storytelling in Princesses of Power focuses a lot more on the overarching plots and character arcs that make things change from episode to episode and season to season. Like the original series, this show is about Adora, an orphan girl who was raised to be a member of the Horde. Alongside with a few friends, she trains to become a captain and eventually defeat the evil princesses. Does this sound a little bit backwards? Well, that's because it is. See, Adora one day stumbles upon a magical sword that turns her into the magical warrior She-Ra, one of the Princesses of Power. Through this transformation and the experiences following it, she quickly realizes that she's been fighting on the wrong side all this time and begins to aid the princesses in their rebellion against the Horde. As far as I can tell, this is where the similarities between the two shows end, besides all the returning characters, of course. What's great about a reboot like this is that it takes a very simple premise and turns it into an important character-defining trait to push the plot forward instead of holding it in place like the original. In the original, She-Ra never seemed too conflicted about fighting the Horde, as they were very explicitly evil, while in this reboot she is very much aware that she is fighting her family, her roots, her old identity, and where she comes from. This really parallels the journey a lot of us go through in realizing that our parents aren't always the great heroes we thought of them as kids. She now realizes that she was on the wrong side when she was training to fight for the Horde, but that doesn't make fighting them exactly easy for her. Adora's transformation into She-Ra is amazing. Unlike shows such as Sailor Moon, it's more than just a costume change. The power makes her bigger and stronger, and is a bit similar to the 2002 reboot of the He-Man series, which saw a more typical looking teenage boy transforming into the hulking figure of He-Man. As She-Ra, she's a lot more confident and a lot more powerful, but this doesn't make her invincible. And she is very fallible, both as a fighter and as a character. Almost every episode we find ourselves meeting a new princess, and even then, there are times where a whole bunch have been dumped on us at once since there are just so many. The original show had a lot of princesses as well, like a lot. So I suppose this does make sense. Don't kill me for saying this, guys, but there's a lot of diversity in the princesses, and they come in all shapes and sizes and colors. This was less common for human-based characters back in the day because toy companies wanted to use the same mold over and over again, but with different hairstyles and colors to make mass production easier. But in this reboot, there's a princess for everyone, whether you're black, or white, or purple. I definitely need to mention Glitter, as she becomes one of She-Ra's closest friends. I mostly found her interesting due to her powers and her family. I did, however, find her relationship with her mother a bit weird. Yes, fighting a lot is something mothers and daughters do, but for some reason it came off more as an older sister fighting with her younger sister than the mother-daughter relationship it is supposed to be portraying. Then there's Glimmer's best friend Bo, who, as you might be able to tell, is not a princess. His interactions with Glimmer were some of the best of the show, and I definitely look forward to learning more about him. The princess's introductions and plots are sometimes interesting. However, I'm happy to say that some of my favorite characters are actually a few of the villains. When Adora left the Horde to fight against them, her place was taken by Catra. She and Adora have a very interesting rivalry that stems from the fact that their boss, Shadow Weaver, always preferred Adora over Catra. Things turn into a game of cat and mouse, where Catra is constantly trying to prove her worth and bring Adora back to the Horde. We learn a lot about the relationship between these two, and I was surprised to see just how fleshed out it got since this is only the first season. This show is very good at taking your expectations of a character and completely turning them around. A large part of that comes from each of the characters being complex and not entirely evil, or in some cases not completely good. Morally gray areas are explored in the show, and sometimes the place a person ends up is solely because the character found it the more convenient place to be. Overall, this show is clearly trying to be much like other cartoons of today, where it touches upon very mature topics like colonization and genocide. It gives the show a sincere and more mature feel to it that both old fans and new ones can appreciate, I think. But despite these positive changes to the show, it is still very far from perfect. To be honest, I was not always completely engaged with the show. Yes, the concepts and characters presented in each episode were interesting, but it was a show that took me a few days to finish. Whereas with the new season of Voltron, I can finish in one watch. I'm sure a lot of this has to do with the fact that this is season 1, and I'm just getting to know the characters, but this is definitely a show you might only want to watch a little at a time. The show did open with a two-parter, which is great and full of action. But after that, I felt the story slowed a bit as we were required to meet each main princess, most of which got a whole episode dedicated to the introduction. I enjoyed most of these episodes, especially Entraptus, who is one of my favorites. But it only made me wish that we could follow them more, instead of having to see new princesses every half hour. Like a lot of animated reboots, these characters are a lot younger than their original counterparts. I'm sure this is to make the characters more relatable, allowing them to focus on stories about growing up, which works really well with Adora realizing she was on the wrong side for much of her young life. But what is the problem with having adults as the main characters? Superhero shows do it all the time. Adults definitely can have relationship issues, and they can still go from nobodies to something much greater. This was showcased in the original She-Ra show, and I just wish more shows would focus on this. I suppose the desire to have that teenage angst in the show was just too much to resist. I'm looking at you, Glimmer. I mean, I love you and your family's history, but get it together, girl. The style of the show is something that has been heavily criticized by both new and returning viewers, but I find it quite charming, or at the very least a much better version of Marvel Uprising. The backgrounds especially were very beautiful, and the details they add to it really make you believe that the land of Etheria is a magical place. The style, however, did clash with the tone at times. As I mentioned before, the show does delve into deep topics, not to mention there are some very intense battle scenes, and the art style sometimes just hindered that by making it seem too soft during gritty moments. For those who are wondering where He-Man might be in all this, I had the same question. The story of those two were very intertwined in the 80s show. In fact, He-Man and She-Ra were twins, so for him not to be in the show at all and be completely absent is puzzling. As far as I know, the rights to He-Man do not belong to Dreamworks, so the show has been developed independently. While the show is not my absolute favorite, I can clearly see a lot of heart was placed into this reboot. It seems a lot less like a remake of the original story, and more of a second draft of an idea that never really got the attention it deserved, which is something that can be said for a lot of reboots from the 80s, as opposed to Teen Titans and Ben 10 and the Powerpuff Girls reboot that really just took an already relatively serious idea with highly praised storytelling and then destroyed that pretty much utterly and entirely. I mean, sure, they could kind of be good, or they have been, but so far, not too many of those from the 90s and on have been good reboots. However, if you truly are a fan of the original She-Ra in every single aspect of the series and are not comfortable with seeing it be different in this incarnation, then this show may not be for you. But if you have enjoyed many of the cartoons that have been released in the past decade, particularly the retellings of things like Transformers or Voltron, you will most likely enjoy this show, and will be looking forward to the second season, just as I am. This show is definitely not playing around, and there is no doubt it is an action show, and is not afraid to show violence, even if it is marketed towards girls. Despite being a Netflix show, it is intended to make most of its money through action figures and merchandise sales. I'm very curious to see how well it can market itself through a streaming service. Thankfully, the action figures are looking pretty good, even better than Voltron so far, which is a good thing, and other merchandise such as shirts are looking pretty great as well. Only time will tell. She-Ra will be on Netflix on November 13th. Thank you guys so much for watching another review video. please feel free to check out my Castlevania and Dragon Prince reviews if you enjoyed this one. And if you would like to help the channel out, please consider becoming a patron. Along with reviews, the channel is going to start doing video essays, and we'll be posting scripts as well as early looks at the videos there. Have an animated day!